Okay, I'm doing a quick tutorial here to go over what we went over in class as far as animating along a path and creating some loop animations, etc. So I'll just go ahead and do a similar thing to what we did. So I'm going to go ahead and start with making that bee. So just a little simple bee. So I'm going to go ahead and grab my sphere here and make it editable and transform the scale, kind of squash them down a little and bring them in so I can see if I've got my little bee body there. And now I'll create in that body, create another sphere for the head and scale that down and maybe move that into place here. So we've got a little head for our bee, and we'll make that head there. And we'll just put a head as the child of the body, so when that animates, we can do that. Let's go ahead and make a wing, or our wings. So I'm just going to use a disk for this, and I'm going to create that and bring it up, and maybe scale that down. So I'm going to go ahead and make that editable by hitting C or going over here to the Make Editable, and scale that wing a little there on the Z-axis, and maybe a little more, and just get that general wing shape that we're going for here. And now I'm going to move that into place. So if I go to my 4-way view here, I can see better from the top where we want that to be. And move it here, and then bring it down into a little bit inside that bee body. Okay. All right. So now I'm going to go ahead and move its rotation point, because if I hit R here to rotate, and I try and rotate that for flapping, it's going to rotate from the center, because that's where its axis is. So I could take my axis tool and go back to move and move that to the end. But then I've got to kind of eyeball where that is. But what we can use is use the axis center tool. So if I go to mesh and then axis center and hit this top one, and I'll open up our dialog, and then we can see we can move our axis according to these little controls here. So if I go to -100%, hit execute. Oh, I'm in the axis tool here. That's not what I want to do. And I don't want Y. That's kind of silly. Sorry about that. Let me get back to normal there. So on our X is what we want to do. So for X, we can do that, hit execute. And now that has moved over to that side for us. And we've got our bee wing, our first wing. So now if I go back and hit my rotate, and we can see that if we rotate, our wing will flap in the way we would want it to flap, so up and down from that point. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and rotate it up a little bit. Now I could make another wing, and I could put that on the other side, but what I'm going to do is use a symmetry object so that it will do what the first wing does. So I'm just going to go up to a symmetry object, and let's name this wing. And I can close this. I don't need this anymore. And then we can drag our wing into our symmetry object, and we'll get our 2 wings. So now if I rotate this one, the other side will do the exact same thing. So keeps you from doing a bunch of extra keyframes, etc. And if we change that one wing, the other wing will change however we change that. All right, so let's add a few little textures really quick to this. So I'm going to go ahead and double click down here, and we'll call this maybe the body. and we want to get those stripes of that bee. So I'm just going to double click here so we can see our material editor. And I'm going to go into my color channel and in the texture, go down to surfaces. And we're going to go with checkerboard. So when I click on my checkerboard thumbnail here, we can go in here, and first off, let's take our color and get us a nice orangish yellow, little orangey for our bee. Okay. And now what we want to do is we want to make this stripe. So on our U frequency, we can bring that down to 0. And now we'll have a stripe. But then if we go down here and maybe make this 5, then we can get some stripes that way. And then that's our nice little bee shader. So I can close that out. And now let's drag that onto our body. Now you can see here what's going on is now we've got our stripes going the wrong way. And so by default, the mapping projection, if we click on our texture here on the body in our texture, we can see it's UVW. So since we want our stripes to go up and down, and we want them to wrap around, we want to go with a cylindrical mapping. So I'm going to go to cylindrical. They're still the wrong direction. So what I need to do is go to my texture tool up here, and now we can see that it just needs to be rotated. So if I go up here, click my rotation, I've still got my body and my texture tag selected. I'm in my texture tool over here, and I can rotate now how that projection is happening. And if I hold down Shift after I start rotating, I can snap every 10 degrees. So at that point, I now have my stripes going the right way, and we're in good shape. So now I can just go back to my model tool here. And the reason the head right now has stripes on it also is because it's a child of the body. So if we look at that, that's why it's just going down the hierarchy. So I'm going to go ahead and just create a new material, and we'll take this one and maybe just make it black. And that will be my head material. And we can just drag that either right onto here, or you could have dragged it up here as well. So there's my head, there's my stripes, so I've got our bee happening. Let's create a wing material. And I don't know, let's go with, got our wing, maybe we give it a little bit of transparency. Just a little, all right. And then I can drag that onto our wings. And now we've got some sort of transparent wings there. Now maybe I'll bring that up a little bit more, just so we can see the wings moving and doing their thing. All right. Here, maybe somewhere there. Cool. All right, so now we've got our bee pretty much ready to go. And I want to do a few things here, some cleanup, just to make it easier when we start animating this guy. So I'm going to take all of these, so I'm just going to select them all, or I could hit Control A or Command A. And I'm going to do a little, I'm going to group these guys. So I can either go to Edit, Objects, Group Objects here, or you can hit Alt-G or Option-G on a Mac and just group those guys, and we'll call that our bee. And now I'm going to make a quick little flower, so we've got something for the bee to fly around. So I'm just going to hide this in the viewport and then the renderer. And let's create a new sphere. And I'm going to make that editable as well. And we'll call this the center. So this will be the center of our flower. I'm not sure still what that's called, but that'll be our center. And then we can, I'm just going to pull that in so we get a nice little round bit there. And make sure that's looking okay. And maybe I'll scale the whole thing down now, just so we can go in there. All right. So now we're going to need some petals for our flower, and I'm just going to do the same thing we did for the wing. And I'm going to go in and grab a disc, and here we go. And now remember, you could rotate this, but then your axis wouldn't be lined up with your world axis anymore. So the best thing to do when you're generating something like this is just to go down in your orientation on your objects. I've got my disk, and then down here in my attributes, I'm going to go and change that orientation to +Z. So now it is lined up, its axis still is lined up with our world axis, but it's going the direction we want. So I'm going to make that editable now by hitting C, and I'm going to scale that in so we can get our petal, maybe scale it down, and I'm just going to move that up a little bit so it's inside there. Now in the past we've used the array object to create an array, but this time we're going to use a MoGraph cloner. So to make our little options here on our flower. So I'm going to go to my MoGraph menu and just come down here and hit cloner. And so over here, let's keep this name. So I'm going to name that petal. And then we'll call this one petals. So if we take our petal and we drag it into our cloner, and you can see it's doing some duplication, but that's not what we want. So let's look at what we can do here in the cloner. So in the cloner, we've got by default, it's a linear mode. So the first thing we want to do is change that to radial. And now we can see it's cloning our petals around. So by default, it's at 5. You can add a couple more if you want to do that. And if we look at the radius, this is the radius of the cloner from the center of it. So if we want to spread those out, we can just move that out a little bit. And you can see that's our plane is XY. If you change this, they would go the other direction. XZ, so you can see how you could quickly create some really nice clones. And again, start angle, end angle, if you only wanted, some of these to happen, we could do that, bring it down, but we're going to do 360 degrees where its the fault is. All right. So now we've got our flower, and at least in our center of our flower. So let's go ahead and make a stem for it. So I'm going to go back into my 4-way view and go to my side view down here and zoom out a little, and let's just go to that view. And so I'm just going to use a spline and make a quick sweep to draw our little stem. So I'm going to click in here, come out a little bit, click and drag for just a little Bezier, and then bring it back down in. I hit my escape key, and there's my stem. And maybe I'll grab it and just pull it down a little bit. There we go. All right. So we just need a spline to now sweep along that. So if I rotate around here and I say, all right, cool, let's get a circle. And I'm going to do a sweep. Let's make that circle a lot smaller. And we're going to do a sweep object. And we'll drag those into there. So our spline. And then the object, we're going to sweep along it. And that's still really big. So I'm going to take my circle and just maybe bring it down to maybe 5. There we go. All right. So now we've got just a little stem there, so it's hanging out, it's doing its thing. If you wanted to get thicker at the end, we could go into our sweep, and end scale could maybe get a little bigger. So if you want to do something like that. So now I'm just cranking up the end scale. So now as it goes, we're getting a little more thicker stem near the bottom. So that's a nice little thing there. And now let's add some materials to this. So I'm going to take my sweep and call that stem. Just keep things organized here. And then I'm going to take all of these and I'm just going to right click and do group objects. And now that's my flower. And let's create some materials for that. So I double clicked here. We're going to call this one petal. And you can just pick a color for that. So I'm going to go with a little purple. And Make sure I'm in my color channel. Another thing to remember, since I did that, where did I do that at? In my transparency? If you take a color, you can always move down and just drag it in to another area. So if you take it and you want to put it somewhere else, just go to that zone and then you can just drop it somewhere else if you have that color there. So I've got my color channel in my purple for my petals. So I can drag that on there. And let's do the center part. So maybe that would be, I don't know, an orange. Get some funky orange color going maybe. All right, and we'll drag that on our center, and I'll name that center. Okay, and now I just need one more little green material for our stem. And just come over here and give it some green. We're being very vibrant. All right, so that'll go on our stem. And now we've got our nice flower. And that's that. Okay, so now we need, let's do a ground plane. So we need something here. I noticed I didn't name my wing material. And again, it's just nice to keep these things organized. So if we undo our bee here, let's see how big our bee is compared to our flower. I think he's in good shape. Oops. More flower back. And we can see what we got there. All right, we got a bee, we got a flower. So let's go ahead and create a ground plane. So we're just going to use a floor object. And remember, the floor is infinite. So even though it shows up this big, if we do render, it goes on all the way to the horizon line. So let's bring that down. We'll go here and we'll bring the floor down to where our stem is. So let's put it right there. And now we've got our nice floor. Everything. So we're going to put just grass. We can leave that as floor. We're going to put just a grass texture on here. So we'll go to our Cinema 4D content browser. And in presets, I'll double click that. And then I'm just going to do a search for grass and see what kind of stuff we've got. So I clicked on the search button. There's grass. Type that in. Hit enter. And we've got a couple grass textures here. So I'm just going to grab one, grass 001, drag it down here. And then I'm going to drag that onto our floor object and see what we get. All right. Well, since this is based on an image, we can see that it's tiling and it's getting a little crazy because it's a very small square. So what we can do is go back to our object manager here and click on our floor and then click on our material and see what we've got. So we're doing a flat projection, that's fine. But we want to blow our scaling up on our texture. So right now by default it's 100%. So I'm going to just go ahead and do 1000%. All right, and now let's take a look and see if that's any better. That's a little better. It's getting there. And so let's do 2000. And this is again just for demonstration, so that's a little funky, a little crazy. So maybe we'll go back down to 1000. Okay. All right, so we're going to have our grass. We've got our flower. Now what we can do is let's use a physical sky in the background just to get some sunlight and some shadows and all of that and some clouds and whatnot. So I'm going to pull down here and go over to physical sky. So now what this does, the physical sky gives you all kinds of options about your time and location. So right now, October, it's at noon. Maybe I'll bring it up. Let's go 2, 3, maybe 3 in the afternoon and see what's going on. And so now we get a nice little warmth of the sun. We've got our shadows. We've got our bee. We've got some haze back here. If we want, we could turn on some clouds. Where's that at? In the details, maybe. Showing stars. Somewhere in here. Now, by default, it's that area shadow, which is softer, but to speed things up, I'm going to go ahead down here and switch it to just ray traced hard. In our sky, horizon line, time location. We could also load in a preset if we wanted. Right here on the basic, we can turn on clouds, and now we get some nice clouds in the background for our little sun, our bee to fly around it. All right, so we've got this. Let's create a couple copies of our flower. So again, I'm going to go to my top view and just see where we're at. And let me just turn this off for a minute so that's not the center. And I'm going to go to my first flower here, and I'm going to create an instance. So under here, under the array tool here, we can do an instance, and that just makes a copy. So anything we do to the first original flower will also happen to these instances. So I'm just going to throw one over here maybe. I'm going to copy and paste, Control-C, Control-V, or Command-C, Command-V on a Mac. And then I'll do it again, Control-C, Control-V, and we'll put maybe 4 flowers out there. And we can go in, we can rotate some of these guys a little if we want. And maybe this one a little that way. And go up. And on this one, maybe give it a little something. All right. So we've got all that going. And so I'm going to take all of this and my floor, my sky, and I'm going to go ahead and turn that back on. And I'm going to group all those and call that my environment or my scene. So I'm going to go ahead and do that and group objects and call that my scene. Okay, so now let's talk about some animation. So with our bee, let me turn off my scene for a minute. And with my bee, so first thing we're going to do is we're going to get him to flap his wings for us. So if we go to our bee and we click on our wing, let's roll down and find that first wing. Go back to our tool, our model tool here. So what I'm going to do, let's say I'm going to have my bee, let's first set our settings before we animate. So let's double check. So I'm going to go to Mode, Project Settings. And then once I'm in there, I'm going to go down to, let's do 24 frames a second. And our maximum time, let's say, we'll make it 5 seconds. So maximum time will be 5, and I'll just do times 24. So 120 frames. And so it'll give us 5 seconds of animation. And then we can look at everything else looks fine. And now if I go down to my wing, go back over here, and I'm looking at my bee, and I'm going to say, okay, I'm going to set a keyframe for the rotation of my wing. So I'm going to turn off my other parameters to set because I don't necessarily need those there. So I've got just rotation highlighted, and I'm going to go to and just set a keyframe there. So let me rotate my wing up a little bit, so that'll be the top of his little flap, and I've got that. Now I'm going to move forward a little bit, maybe 8 seconds, and I'm going to rotate, oops, and I'm going to rotate that back down. Sorry, just the wing, and I'm going to rotate that down and set a new keyframe. So there's that there. Remember to set your keyframe. And now if we look, we got that. Now if I'm going to copy this guy, I could go forward now and try and get it back up to where it was, and I could look. Or if I click on this and then hold down Command or Control on a PC, I can move forward a few frames and it'll copy that keyframe. So now it'll flap once, all right? So I'm going to go back. So now we want this to go, up and down, up and down, up and down, keep looping. So what we could do is take these keyframes and copy them and paste them on through. But another thing we can do is if we go to our timeline, so we can either open our timeline up through the window or we could change our layout to animation or to animate. So if we do that, now if I just click on the wing here, it's going to select our keyframes, and then over here in the Attributes Manager, we've got this little properties for our track. So what I could do is after here, there's a bunch of options. We can do a repeat. So with that repeat, I can now go to repetitions, and I'm just going to throw in 50, even though I won't have that many probably in the animation. But now if I go back here and rewind and hit play, it'll keep looping for me. So I don't have to do anything else with that. Now right now my preview range is set to 72 frames, so I'm going to pull that back out through full 120, and now we can see our bee doing its little thing. All right, and so that's the loop. So back here on the after. So I'm going to go back to my just my basic standard thing, and let's make the flower rotate. Let's just do that. So if we go to our cloner and we say, all right, what I'm going to do here is at this first frame, rotation is great. Going to set a keyframe by clicking here, and then I'm just going to go to the end at 120, and let's just rotate it a little bit. So we'll say 240 degrees. So we'll just have a nice, and then I'll set a new keyframe, and now we've got a nice, just slow rotation of the flower. And if we look, we can see that, actually, are all my instances in there. So now we can see all of our instances are also rotating. So if I do a little render of this scene, we can see we've got 4 flowers, we've got this weird grass texture, and we've got our bee. All right, so what I'm going to do now real quick is I'm going to set a motion path or a spline that I want my bee to follow. Now I could just move my bee to different points and set keyframes, but we're going to do an align to spline. So I'm just going to go up here and do take my pen, and I'm going to switch from my type from Bezier to B-spline. So that makes a nice motion path. And then I'm just going to go in my top view and start just doing a quick little animation. So we'll start the bee here maybe. Maybe he'll fly by this one, fly by this one. This is going to be really fast in this short amount of time, but maybe it's going to come around here and then back out. I'm going to hit escape. So now we've got our spline, and if we look, its height is right about, since it's at 0, since we made everything, their flowers center at 0, it's kind of at the center of the flowers. Now we can go back in here. If we go to our move tool, we can, raise it up and down our spline and get some, nice variation. We can always adjust our points if we want to do that as well. And even these out a little. Okay. So now what we want to do, we're going to use that path. We want to take our bee and right click and do a Cinema 4D tag, align to spline. And now if I click on that, it'll say what spline do I want to use. So I can use my this spline here. So maybe we'll name this bee path. And if I click down here, I can either click on the little picker and pick it there, or I could drag it down into that zone. So now you can see our B is stuck to the beginning of our spline. Now to get it to move along, we have to set a few keyframes. So what we'll do is set our position here. And so another way to animate, if there's a little circle here by what you want to animate, you know, you can click that to set a keyframe. So what we'll do is right now we'll hit position 0%, and we'll move forward. And at 120, I'm going to change that to 100%. We can see him move along. And there we are. So it's going to be pretty fast. He's whipping along. Now you can see our B is not lined up correctly how we would like him to be lined up. So if we go back to our line to spline, we've got a little checkbox here called tangential. All right, and so now you can see he's flying along. He's on our spline. It's exactly where we want him to be. Now the thing to remember on this, if for some reason you built your B facing a different direction, you can change your axis. So if I look here and I rewind to the beginning, and if I change my axis to X, you can see my B would be sideways. So if you modeled it in a different direction, just change your axis. And if for some reason your B is backwards, what you could do is just select your B, go to your axis tool, rotate it 180 degrees. I'm holding down Shift, and then your B will be the right direction. Now mine's backwards, but that's just what you can do. So if I go back in my axis tool, I can rotate him back. Oops, not that way. There we go. I just did an undo. So now my B is back to normal. Make sure you uncheck your axis tool because otherwise that'll be going on. So now I've got my B flying around. It's following a path and it's coming in and doing its thing. Now, if we wanted to get a little more excitement than just having this view, we can use a camera. So let's create a target camera. And I'm going to go ahead and turn that on. And by default, our camera target is right in the center. So now that camera is going to look at that target. So if we take that camera target though, and we say, well, I'm going to click my camera, click on my target tag, and I can make that my B. So if I click on my B, now my camera will always look at my B. So it's going to always be in the center of the screen, and we can do that. And that can be a little, a little generic, but now we could go ahead and we could either animate our target, go back to animating our target separately. We could move our camera around a little. We could do a lot of different things here that we could make happen to have our B, our camera be differently. So if we, just moved our camera or our target near the B and out past the B, we could do some overshoots and do some really interesting stuff that way. I don't want this to get too long, so real quick, I'll talk about rendering. So when you're ready to go, like I said in class, it's best to render out stills and then just put them together in After Effects or Premiere or even QuickTime you could do it in. And so for that, I'm going to go ahead and go to my render settings. And let's see what we've got. We've got 1280 by 720 by default. I'm going to set my lock ratio, and I'm just going to do maybe half this, so we could say, or maybe do 320, or what would it be, 360, that's right, sorry. And then 72, we want to make sure our frame rate's the same as our project, so we'd set that to 24, and that's good. We want to say how many frames we want to render, so if we said all frames, I'm just going to do, for time's sake here, I'm just going to go ahead and do a manual amount of frames, so we'll just do we'll do 1 second. So I'll do 0 to 24, and let's go ahead and set what we're going to save it. So I'm going to save to my desktop. And I'm going to do a new folder called B frames. And inside that is where we'll save it, and I'll just call it B-Flight. So we've got B-frames, B-Flight. I'm going to do a TIFF, or you could do pings or targas, whatever you're feeling. This is if you've got something that you want to have an alpha channel on. This won't work because we've got a floor and a sky, and we'll get into that next week as far as using some object buffers that we could do with that, and we'll do that next week. Save though again here, where it is, what you're saving. You don't have to worry about that. Anti-aliasing, we could go ahead and crank that up to best, and that's kind of our zone there. Maybe, let's see how long this, I'm going to throw on ambient occlusion, and I just want to see if that kills our render time. It's a little bit, I don't know if we're getting much out of it, but yeah, I'll go ahead and turn it off. That's fine. All right, so what I'm going to do then is go ahead and render out these frames real quick. So I'm just go render to picture viewer, and now we can see it rendering. And then I'll open up After Effects and we can check that out. So I'm going to go ahead and hit After Effects here. While that's rendering, it's almost done. And if you remember in class, we also did the motion clip as well for the loop. So you can do that either way. For that, we went up to, once we selected the keyframes, you go to Animate, and then Add Motion Clip on those wings. So that was another way you could do that, and then create a loop. All right, so we've got all our frames rendered. I'm going to go ahead and close this up. Let's pull so let's do a new file, and we can go into After Effects here and say, I'm just going to import file and go to our desktop. There's my B-frames, and I'm going to pick the first one, and here you can see it says PNG sequence. That's perfect. Want it as footage. Go ahead and hit import. Brings them in as a clip. Now we can go down here, just drag on to create a comp at that size, and we've got that. Let me pull it up there. And so now we've got our B clip that we can then save out, add to render queue, or however you want to do that, or add to do it through Media Encoder. So that's a quick little recap of class on Thursday. I hope it helps out. If you've got any questions, send me an email, and I'll see you guys Tuesday. All right, bye-bye.